Today, we're going to learn the 4 things that I have learned from Steve Jobs of Apple. Hi, I'm Chris Reynolds, and I'm on a mission to help independent financial advisors build a better business through a remarkable client experience. In this podcast, you're going to learn how to do that from my conversations with the visionaries, the leaders, the independent advisors who are reshaping the future of the financial advice industry. At the end of each episode, you're going to walk away with an actionable idea that you can take and use right now, and it will help you to build a better business today. This is Turning the Page. So every entrepreneur, in my view, needs a hero. Someone they can look up to, someone they can learn from, someone they can study, see what they have done, see the mistakes they've made, and move on from there. My personal hero is Steve Jobs of Apple fame. Now, despite some of the things you might have heard about Steve Jobs, some of the things that Steve might have done, you've seen him portrayed on movies, you've read about him in books. He wasn't the nicest guy in the world. In fact, he was pretty rough on people. He wanted the best out of people, and he developed a sort of this reputation. Now, despite of the reputation that Steve Jobs might have had, you can't deny an individual who has had such an impact on society. Like, all you have to do is be on a bus, be on a train, be on any public transportation, and you look around and literally everybody is glued to their phone. We've become addicted to these devices. They have changed the way that we live. They've changed the way that we do business. They've changed entire industries. And that is due to one person. And in our lifetime, in my lifetime, from somebody who has come up with an idea to build such an impact on society as somebody that I think should be studied. His mission was to change the world. And I think that a lot of people may say that, but Steve Jobs is one of the people who actually did it. Now, when I talk to financial advisors and I, go across the country and I talk to people about business and entrepreneurship, I always use Steve Jobs, and I use him because, again, I don't think that there is a better example of somebody who has defined entrepreneurship. It literally comes from nothing and builds a multi-trillion-dollar company in our lifetime. So I think, from all my reading, I've seen all the movies. I've pretty well read every book that has ever been written about Steve Jobs. I've read every article. And there's about 4 different things that I've learned from Steve that I can apply in business. And so I thought in this podcast, I would share what those are. So here are the 4. The first thing that is key is he always starts with the client. In other words, he always asks himself, what is it that would make a client's life better? Look at everything from the eyes of the client. So much of business and bad business is you build a product and you go find somebody to sell it to. That's not how Steve approached things. He said, what problem do I need to solve for my client, and how can I make that problem and bring the simplest solution to that particular client? And I'll give you a perfect example of this, an example I use quite a lot, which is the iPod. His daughter Lisa, how this was developed. His daughter Lisa used to have a Sony Walkman on her head. She had, when they carried around the discs in the on their belt, and she would listen to one disc at a time. And one day he said to her, I'm going to build a device that will put 1,000 songs in your pocket, and it'll be the songs that you want. So he started with what the client wanted. So what does the client want? The client doesn't want to carry around this big thing everywhere they go, and doesn't want to just listen to one CD and have to pull it out and change it. What they want is access to their music wherever they are. And so that was the premise that the iPod was started with. MP3 technology had existed far before Apple, but what he did was he made it something that solved the client's issue. How do I get all of my music with me? How do I get the music that I actually want to listen to, as opposed to, CD after CD or album after album, if you're old like me? Right? And how do I make it easy to use? How do I make it easy to get that music? And how do I make it easy to play? It was from those premises that the whole concept was built. He brought engineers together. He brought how would we get the music? How can we put it into one place? How can we make it easy to download? How can we put it onto a very small thing that you can put into your pocket? And if you've ever seen the demo when he actually launched it, he pulled it out of that little place in your jeans. And he's like, do you ever wonder what this little pocket is? It's to keep your iPod in. And it worked, right? Very simple features like stop, start, rewind. That's it. There wasn't a lot to it. He didn't try to make it overly complicated. And he also wanted to make it very cost effective. So he put it out in the market at a very low price and then made their money in actually downloading the songs. And so that's where the actual money was made and the economic generator. And it was genius. He solved his client's problems. He did it in a cool way. He made it simple to utilize. And he did everything from the viewpoint of the client, starting with his daughter, Lisa. So that's the first lesson, is start with the client. What's the second thing that I've learned from Steve Jobs? Make it as simple as possible. There's a tendency, not just in our industry, but in every industry, to make things way more complicated than they need to be. Now, I'm in the wealth management industry, and I can tell you we make things unbelievably complicated. We can take the simplest concept and make it unbelievably complicated. Just look at the mutual fund industry. The mutual fund industry alone has something like 35,000 different codes. Now, no one could convince me that there's 35,000 different ways to invest a client's money. Nobody. And yet we do that. And we make it more complicated. We use terminology that is complicated. We make forms complicated. Think of the government. Think of how complicated they make things on behalf of the people that they're supposed to be representing. There's a diluted belief that the more things that you have to offer a client, the better you will do. And in fact, it's the exact opposite. The more things that you have to offer a client means you have more complexity, more confusion, more administrative errors. The easiest business to disrupt, as they've taught us, is the business that is unrealistically complex. And then all you have to do is provide the consumer with a good alternative, but very limited choice. This is Innovator's Dilemma 101. So let me use the example of Steve Jobs and what he had done. When Steve Jobs, everyone remembers the story, or hopefully remembers the story, that Steve Jobs was fired as the CEO of Apple. He went on to build another company, Pixar, and eventually he was rehired to come back and fix the Apple that he had left. The Apple that he had left, had lost its way, and in fact was somewhere between 9 to 12 months away from bankruptcy unless something drastic was done. So when Steve came back, he went to his board of directors and he said, we can't be the best at everything. We can't keep going down the path we've had. Let's focus our attention on a few things that we think will change people's lives, and let's be the best at those businesses. So when he came back, and I don't know the exact number, so I'm going to use it for illustrative purposes, there was something like 112 different product lines that Apple was involved in when Steve Jobs took over from coming back as CEO. Within a very short period of time, he went from 112 product lines down to under 10. And he focused intently on just those businesses. He said, we're going to make very big bets on these 10 things, and that's what's going to make Apple great. And as we look back in history, he was right. So what's the lesson I take from Steve Jobs? Keep things simple. I know we want to make them complicated. I know that we think we're doing better for our consumer, but we're not. The simplest is when there's limited choices, but great choices. What is the third thing? World-class communication. That's what Steve Jobs was known for. The ability to communicate your story very effectively to a consumer that you want to target. That's the secret. Right? You can have the best product in the world. You can have the best service in the world. You could be the best financial advisor in the world. But if no one knows you exist, what's the point? He was very, very good at taking very complex concepts and ideas and communicating them in a very simple, easy to understand manner that people wanted to buy into. And he was very, very good at delivering that message. And this didn't come by accident. I've read biographies about Steve Jobs and I've listened to podcasts. Before he would make a presentation, those big presentations that he would make, bring out the iPod, for example, he would practice in the neighborhood of 80 different times the same talk over and over and over again until it was perfected. Every nuance, every movement, every illustration that he made was well practiced and well defined. The best example, and one of my personal favorites of Apple, was their advertising campaign. Again, when he came back, this is what I believe, and it still gives me goosebumps to this day. The best advertising campaign that I've ever seen was the Think Different campaign. And if you haven't seen the Think Different campaign, you can Google it. It's on YouTube, easy to find, but it's genius. At that time, who do you think Steve Jobs wanted to appeal to? Apple at that time had two primary target markets, and the Think Different campaign talked to those markets. So do you remember who they were? It was a long time ago, but the first market that Apple wanted to crack was the artist market. You remember this? Every artist, if you were a graphic artist, you didn't have anything but a Mac computer on your desk. They specifically made the graphics so beautiful that if you were an artist and you used computers in this type of manner, you needed an Apple. And it was well done. Right? They focused in on. Now, why artists? Why graphic artists specifically? Steve Jobs said, well, they're cool. They're the cool people. People want to be like them. So if we want to be known in the graphic art, let's first get them on side. And what's cool about graphic artists? They think different. And that was part of their campaign. Now, who is the second market? Second market Apple wanted to target was what I call the geeks, and I'm using geeks in a positive way. I'm not using geeks as in a negative way. I'm using as, for if I need to know something about technology, and my brother is probably a perfect example, I would go to my brother. He's a computer geek. He knows everything about computers. Apple wanted these people on side. They wanted to show that they thought different, that they weren't geeks. They were cool because they knew that they were the people who actually influenced the use of technology. And it worked. Right? It was a genius campaign, and they really wanted to go after the artists and the people who knew technology that other people went to for technology knowledge, and the Think Different campaign worked immensely well. And the last thing that I really admire and I learned from Steve Jobs, although I don't really have it myself as someone with ADHD, it's hard to stay focused. But, Steve Jobs, you have to admire his intense focus. There's a famous quote from Steve that said, he's as proud of everything he said no to as the things he said yes. In other words, what he was illustrating is you have to say no to 100 good ideas to get to the one great idea. When you're an entrepreneur, everything sounds like a great idea. And there is, by the way, opportunity in almost anything. Right? So it is very easy to get distracted. It is very easy to go off and search out new opportunities and new things for our clients and new this and new that. But what Steve Jobs was really good at was staying incredibly focused on a few things and saying no to everything else. We can't be great at everything, but we can only be great at a few things. And it's very, very, very hard to say no to a great idea. But you have to have intense focus. You have to have a place where you can have a competitive advantage, and you have to create the most amount of value for your clients. So these are your filters. And I admire Steve Jobs for being so incredibly focused. Now, was every idea he had great? No, absolutely not. But the few that were really were. And as I said, change that the whole environment in which we live. Because if you chase every great idea, and it's a saying that my business coach used to say to me, a dog that chases two rabbits goes hungry. You have to be incredibly focused in business because you only have so much time. You only have so much resources. And the thing that you can take from Steve Jobs is be incredibly focused on the things that matter. So what are my conclusions? My conclusion is you can learn a lot from people who have done incredible things. That's one of my sort of obsessions is I love to study what people have done, what have made them successful, but also learn from the mistakes that they have made. And for me, I don't know, as I said earlier, anyone who has contributed more to society than Steve Jobs' Apple. He's changed almost everything that we have done. And in fact, as a mission and how he used to recruit people into Apple, he used to say, you can either stay where you are and do a job, or you can come to Apple and you can change the world. And isn't that what we all want to do? So does any of these things resonate with you? Any of these things that you would like to do within your own business? If you would, and you want to talk about it, I would love to have a virtual coffee with you. This is one of my favorite topics, and I would love to talk all about it. So just go to the show notes, click on the link, and we can book a virtual coffee. Looking forward to talking to you then. Thanks for joining me on Turning the Page. What did you learn from today's episode? If you follow me on LinkedIn, please drop me a comment there. I'd love to chat with you about it over a virtual coffee. Send me a message on LinkedIn, or you can do so at our website. The link's in the show notes. I'm Chris Reynolds, and until next time.